There definitely does seem to be that. But Ray, what about Americans? What do they want their president to do? Do they want Joe Biden to give Ukraine more support, especially in this very dire hour?
Ukraine has been an issue of controversy over the last several presidential administrations, Obama, Trump, and now Biden, with choruses of critics on both sides saying, you're not doing enough to help Ukraine and you're doing too much to help Ukraine. This will only provoke Russia. This is far afield from American interests, and no American risks should be taken in Ukraine. So presidents, 3 of them in a row now, have gotten an earful about what to do. Americans themselves have not been particularly involved on this issue. We've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, economic problems, and high volume domestic political conflict. Ukraine has not been front and center here in United States political debates. That may very well change now that Ukraine coverage is dominating American news services. And when an American turns on the radio, turns on TV, or signs on to the web to surf news sites, what you see is destroyed apartment buildings, fleeing people, frightened civilians, things blowing up in the distance. This will center American opinion. And in the next several days, in advance of the State of the Union address, one of the most important speeches President Biden will give during this year, it'll be interesting to track how American public opinion will be changing on this issue. But up until now, even as the crisis escalated in Eastern Europe, even as the volume of the back and forth between Russia, Europe, and the United States increased, Americans were not highly engaged on the Ukraine issue.
Okay, Ray Suarez, thank you for that update from DC. Thank you so much. Okay, well, let's now get a view from Russia. We can speak to Sergei Utkin, the head of Strategic Assessment Section, Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations. Thank you so much for being on Euronews tonight. Now, the pictures that we've seen already, from this invasion by Russian people leaving, injured, killed, they really can't be any winners in this, can there?
Yes, indeed. I don't see any good scenarios here. I think it's a great catastrophe for Russia and Ukraine, what's happening. And the big question is where this whole terrible war can go now, how long it will last. If it ends somehow with negotiations very soon, which is unlikely, to be frank, then you could probably sell it to the people as something that was necessary to do, which is what Putin is saying currently. But if it lasts for a long time, this will be a disaster, and probably this will be impossible to cover with any propaganda campaign.
Well, you bring up President Putin now. He has been saying today that he's open to dialogue. But what do you see as his real aim in all of this?
Well, if we listen to him carefully, we'll see that he's basically speaking about demilitarization of Ukraine and what one could call dismemberment of Ukraine, creation of several entities. Some of them might choose a way of align with Russia. Some would be probably more distant. It all sounds like a storyline from a fiction novel, but the negative consequences that Russia is getting because of this terrible move are unprecedented, and that means that also gains, at least in Putin's terms, also have to be unprecedented to justify that. Whether this will also be seen as a gain by the population, it will depend on the length and brutality of the campaign. The harder it will go, the harder it will be to sell it to the people.
And so do you think that Western powers should perhaps be worried that they should be doing more, given that what we understand, the kind of country that President Putin perhaps wants to turn Ukraine into?
Well, I think you already have quite some Western reaction, number of very serious sanctions that will have an impact. And overall, I just don't see how this terrible campaign can end as a Russian success. So you can leave even the sanctions alone and just think of what Russia would do in Ukraine to control the territory or to create kind of government that would be better from the point of view of the Russian authorities. All that is super complicated, and I don't see how this can be done smoothly and successfully.
But what if Putin was allowed what if Putin was allowed to go forward and to allow this to make a regime change in Ukraine? What then should the West be saying or doing?
Well, in the West, you have enough clever people who look into all sorts of instruments they have. The biggest problem is, of course, that if there is a very big determination on the part of the Russian government to just push for this military solution, it will be practically impossible to stop it until it runs its course. So first you have the devastating consequences of this war, and only then we'll see what can be made out of that. Can you have any kind of negotiations also between Russia and the West? At this point, all the previously existing negotiations formats are practically destroyed, and new are not yet created, and it's impossible to create them right in the middle of this warfare.
Okay, Sergei Utikin, Head of Strategic Assessment Section at Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations, we thank you so much for being on the programme. Thank you so much. Well, we will now take a short break, but do stay with us on Euronews Tonight for more analysis on the Ukraine crisis.
Блядь, звони маме, говори, чтобы в метро шла.
Да нет, там я видел рубашку, там все нормально.
Там целые?
Я посмотрю. Вон, блядь, саперы и забрали. Сейчас он, блин, стоит во дворе, блин, собирая осколки.
А есть счет.
Участники на полицию, полиция на участников.
Russian troops are advancing on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, as the government calls on people to defend the city. President Zelensky appeals for more help for his country. President Vladimir Putin says he's willing to send a delegation to Minsk for negotiations, but only if Ukraine demilitarizes. As EU foreign ministers thrash out another round of sanctions against Russia, NATO leaders meet to discuss the alliance's next steps. Welcome back to the program. Now, tens of thousands of Ukrainians began leaving their homes on Thursday. More are following Friday's developments that saw Russian troops advance. Well, for more on what has been happening on the ground, Antonia and tShould is in central Ukraine. Thank you so much for being with us right now. Can you sort of explain to us what the situation on the ground is, where you are right now?
Hi, Miriam. Thank you so much for having me. So right now I'm at the city that is called Kropivnitsky, which is the Kirovograd region. I had to leave Kiev, the capital, this morning because at 4 p.m. we heard a blast and it was the shrapnel hitting the house that stands next to mine. So we had to pack our bags and go. On February 24th, when Russia started a large full-scale invasion of Ukraine, people were terrified and people were panicking. However, it's not happening anymore. People have organized and there are clusters of territorial defense around Kiev and other major cities of Ukraine. People of Ukraine, men of Ukraine, women of Ukraine are ready to protect their land. They're ready to stand against the Russian aggression.
So what you're saying is that Ukrainians are somewhat, they're acting very resolutely now in the face of war with Russia.
Absolutely. Ukraine is totally united in the face of the Russian aggression.
What about for the people that are staying, particularly in the capital, Kiev? Have you spoken to anyone there, and how worried are they?
Oh, absolutely. I've spoken to people that who have no other places to go, who have had to stay in Kiev. Well, they are now also organized, and there are bomb shelters that are operating across Kiev. A lot of people are hiding in the basements, but whenever the sirens go off, the workers of the critical infrastructure continue working, hospitals continue working, policemen continue working. So despite the fact that we're all in danger, we're all in real danger, and nobody actually knows what's going to happen next, Ukraine stands solid.
What does it feel like, if you don't mind me asking, to be in this situation where you're essentially in a circumstance like it is one of the world wars from the past, to be hiding in the underground, to be taking shelter? Can you sort of tell us a little bit more about that and how you feel about it?
Well, nobody is feeling happy about the situation, but I would like to remind the whole world that Ukraine has been in the state of undeclared Russia's war for the last 8 years now, that has started in Donbass. So a lot of people of Ukraine actually already know and have already known for 8 years how to live in the face of war, what it feels like of taking shelter several times a day. I haven't experienced that before. This was my first time yesterday, and this is terrifying. As a mother, I don't think that any child, any kid in this world, any family in this world should actually have that experience in their life.
They definitely shouldn't. And if you don't mind me asking, how are your children feeling, and what sort of support are you giving them right now? Because this must be, it's a scary time for anyone, but especially for children, it must be horrifying.
Well, what we're doing for our children is that we're supporting them in every way we can. We're not hiding the truth. We're telling them the truth, and we're speaking through the emotions with them. Nothing else that can be done. What we can do is stay with them, explain what's happening, and make sure that we all survive.
Antonia and tShould, we can't thank you enough for being on the program, and I do hope that you and your family do manage to stay safe. Thank you so much for being part of Euronews tonight.
Thank you for
so
having
much.
me.
Okay, we will take a short break here, but still to come on Euronews tonight, we'll be looking at further at the West's measures against Russia and asking, are sanctions enough to hit Vladimir Putin where it hurts? Stay tuned.
Get the latest world news from a European perspective. The latest headlines coming up shortly on Euronews Tonight.
Welcome back to Euronews Tonight. Now, Western leaders have so far responded to Russia's invasion of Ukraine with economic sanctions, but many are questioning whether these go far enough. Restrictive measures have targeted Russian banks, airlines and top Kremlin officials in a unified attempt to stop Moscow accessing money. UEFA is now poised to cut ties with Russian sponsor Gazprom, hours after the gas giant was ditched by German football team FC Schalke on Thursday. Is now discussing whether to prohibit Moscow from the international payment network SWIFT, which many believe will seriously harm Russian trade. Well, to discuss Russian economic sanctions further, we're now joined by Bill Browder, the head of Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Bill Browder, thank you so much for being on Euronews Tonight. Now, we're constantly hearing about these fresh waves of sanctions from Western leaders. In their current form, are they going to really hit Putin where it hurts, do you think?
Well, I've read the sanctions lists pretty carefully, coming out of the United States, out of the EU, out of the UK. And over the course of the last few days, the lists and the sanctions have come to a level which is almost good enough to really affect the calculus of Vladimir Putin. I would say that there's still two remaining things that need to be done. The first you just mentioned, which is SWIFT, to unplug Russia from the international banking system. And the second is to sanction the oligarchs, the top richest oligarchs in Russia who are holding Vladimir Putin's cash. If those two types of sanctions were put in place, I think it would really, truly grind Putin to a halt, because he'd have to really look carefully at he'd effectively lose an enormous amount of money and put Russia back to the Stone Age as far as the economy is concerned.
Well, Bill, we've heard a lot about SWIFT finally on the table. You say it's going to finally, grind Putin to a halt. But what if it doesn't actually do that? Then what? This is the big sanction that we've been waiting for. What if it doesn't actually work?
Well, it's not clear that it's going to work right away. So Putin is a guy who definitely can't lose face. He's a guy who can't show weakness. He's a guy who has to be defiant no matter what comes at him. But just very realistically, if Russia is disconnected from SWIFT, the economy will implode. It will completely, it will be a catastrophe for the Russian economy. And if the major oligarchs were sanctioned, then Putin's own wealth would be wiped out and completely inaccessible. And those are two very material things to Vladimir Putin. Now, what does he stop attacking Ukraine on the day that that happens? Surely not. But does it put him in a position where everything that he's worked for the last 20 years has been sacrificed? Surely yes. And at that point, we are then in a position where we have some leverage, where there's going to be a real conversation, a real discussion. And perhaps during those conversations, we can come to some place where the entire security of the West isn't threatened.
Well, that really is the question, what leverage is really going to work. Now, of course, you bring up the oligarchs there. There have been reports, though, that the Russian mega rich potentially are turning to cryptocurrency to then avoid sanctions. So what do you make about that then?
Well, I think that that's a very important point, and cryptocurrencies are sort of ripe for abuse and ripe for sanctions evasion. But at the end of the day, a Russian who's worth $20 billion doesn't have $20 billion of cryptocurrencies. They might have $1 billion of cryptocurrencies, but they own shares in major Western companies. They own very visible properties, airplanes, yachts, etc. And all the stuff that's part of the regular banking system, the regular world, can be frozen and seized. And believe me, that would have a very dramatic impact on their psychology and the psychology of Vladimir Putin. There's no question about it.
Well, let's talk about, how dramatic this really could be. I mean, if SWIFT does become part of the sanctions package, just how quickly can you see Putin maybe coming back to dialogue, coming back to the table and maybe removing his troops from Ukraine?
Well, I'm not sure I can make that prediction, because it all depends on his own psychology, which I don't think anyone has a view on. I don't think he even knows how quickly he'd come back to the negotiating table. But what I can say, and I'm an expert on Vladimir Putin, I've been fighting with him and in a conflict with him for more than a decade. One has to find where does he have, where is he exposed? Where is the leverage? What does he care about? And we can't predict what his actions will be, but what we can do is we know what he cares about. And if we can put what he cares about in jeopardy, then that is the beginning of a position where we have leverage. And if we have leverage, then at some point he's going to want to then get rid of that situation where we have leverage, and that's when you start talking. And so I don't think that anyone can make a prediction about how he's going to behave, but what we can make a prediction about is what he cares about. And if he cares about his money, and if he cares about the Russian economy going into a massive catastrophic tailspin, that's when we're in a position where at some point we're in a position where he'll want to talk to us.
Well, let's hope that we can, that world leaders can, of course, get him into that position to talk. Bill Browder, thank you for speaking to us and for your thoughts on really how to leverage the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we will now take a short break, but still to come, a swell of support for Ukraine across the globe. We'll show you what's been happening in Moscow, London, and in Paris.
This Monday on Euronews.
Discover flagship projects boosting regions across Europe.
Our region has come out of isolation.
Learn how they improve lives.
We've realised that together we are more intelligent.
Hear from the people who have benefited.
Small gestures can do a lot in terms of environmental impact.
That's in Smart Regions on Euronews and Euronews.com.
The latest headlines coming up shortly on Euronews tonight.
Welcome back to the programme. President Volodymyr Zelensky has been out on the streets of the capital, Kiev, tonight to give a message to Ukrainian people and Russia. Now, he was joined by the Prime Minister and other officials who have insisted they will not be leaving the capital.
Our troops are here, citizens are here. All of us are here protecting the independence of our country, and it will continue to be this way. Glory to our defenders, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes.
Across Russia on Thursday, thousands of people came out to protest the invasion of Ukraine. Police arrested hundreds of demonstrators in Moscow's Pushkin Square. Many carried banners and were shouting "No to war." Protests also took place across major European cities, urging a more exact response from their governments towards Russian aggression. Now, in London, there were demonstrations outside Downing Street as Boris Johnson faced criticism in the Commons regarding the effectiveness of his government sanctions. And there were also protests in Paris as people gathered to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They also called for tougher actions from the EU and NATO to support Ukraine's forces fighting across the country. Well, that's all we have for the programme. Thank you for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.
It's been such an amazing time for me here in Romania.
You've changed your approach to plastic waste.
I turned my backyard garden into an urban garden here in London.
I'm rethinking the surgery by 3D printing human cells.
The intersections between art and technology are truly endless.
How do you provide creativity for the team or for myself? I definitely have the coolest job in the world.
Get all the latest on Euronews Now, coming up shortly.
You're watching Euronews Tonight. I'm Mariam Zaidi, and these are the headlines this hour. As Russian troops advance on Kiev, President Volodymyr Zelensky takes to the streets of the capital to insist his government will not be going anywhere.
Our troops are here, citizens are here. All of us are here protecting the independence of our country, and it will continue to be this way.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's willing to send a delegation to Minsk for negotiations, but only if Ukraine demilitarizes. The EU puts President Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on its sanctions list, but holds off from including the SWIFT banking payment system. Despite hundreds of arrests across Russia on Thursday in St. Petersburg, protesters once again took to the streets. Welcome to the programme. The battle for Kiev is underway as Ukraine continues its fight for survival on the second day of Russia's military invasion. After taking the Chernobyl exclusion zone to the north on Thursday, Russian forces have swept down towards the capital. Fierce street-to-street firefights have erupted in the city as Ukrainian defenders try to repel the attack. Across the country, Russia has mounted further military operations in an effort to take another major urban areas. Civilian casualties continue to rise. President Volodymyr Zelensky has been out on the streets of Kiev tonight to send this message to Ukrainian people and Russia.
Our troops are here, citizens are here. All of us are here protecting the independence of our country, and it will continue to be this way. Glory to our defenders, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes.
The Kremlin says it's analysing a request by the Ukrainian president to hold talks. Ukraine's leader said he would be willing to discuss a non-aligned status for his country, preventing Kiev from joining NATO. However, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has called on Ukraine's armed forces to overthrow the current regime.
Once again, I appeal to the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine. Do not allow neo-Nazis and Bandera to use your children, your wives and elderly as human shields. Take power into your own hands. It seems that it will be easier for us to come to an agreement than it will be to come to an agreement with this gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis who settled in Kiev and took the entire Ukrainian people hostage.
Well, for more on the situation in Kiev, we can now join Sasha Vakulina, who's currently sheltering for safety. Sasha, we know that these are very, hard times for you, the fact that you are sheltering. So thank you so much, of course, for being back with us on Euronews tonight. Now, we know that President Zelensky has, of course, taken to the streets to stir up the support of his people. Has that reassured them in any way?
It definitely has. That was a very strong message by Ukrainian president. He was not alone. He was joined by his top team. He said, we are here. We're in Kiev. We're in the streets of Kiev, and we are not going anywhere. That was a very important message as well, because there were rumors today, during the day, that Zelensky might not be in Kiev. And he just needed to do that also to say that was not true and to
ничем. Мы в четвертый раз предпримем такую попытку. И я это сделаю впервые в качестве президента. Но Украина это сделает в последний раз в соответствии с Будапештским меморандумом. Мы призываем провести заседание на уровне министров иностранных дел. Мы считаем, что Будапештский меморандум не работает, что это пакет решений, принятых в 1994 году, которые сегодня оспариваются. В ближайшие недели я буду требовать созыва Совета Безопасности с участием Германии и Турции, также чтобы разработать новые гарантии безопасности для Украины, которые нам нужны прежде чем мы окажемся в серой зоне, в вакууме безопасности. Что мы еще можем сделать? Мы будем продолжать наращивать оборонный потенциал Украины с учетом европейской перспективы и будем требовать конкретного графика процесса вступления Украины в в НАТО мы будем просить о программах ленд-лиза, о поставках новых вооружений и техники для армии, которая защищает всю Европу. Мы будем требовать пакета мер, который обеспечил бы интеграцию Украины в евроатлантическое сообщество. Но в ответ мы наталкиваемся на молчание. И пока будет это молчание, не будет молчания на востоке Украины, в Европе в целом и во всем мире. И, дамы и господа, я очень благодарен тем странам, которые своими заявлениями и практическими делами поддержали Украину. Страна, которая на нашей стороне, на стороне истины, на стороне международного права. И я не буду сейчас никого называть по имени. Я не хочу, чтобы кто-то испытывал стыд. Это их дело, это их вопрос, это вопрос их совести. Я не знаю, как они будут объяснять свои действия тем украинским солдатам и мирным жителям, которые сегодня погибли. 2 солдата и 3 мирных жителя. Сегодня рано утром погиб украинский офицер в результате обстрела с использованием оружия, запрещенного по Минским соглашениям. Я не знаю, о чем он думал в последние минуты своей жизни. Он, наверное, не думал о повестке дня мир, по реализации Минских соглашений. Он, наверное, однако хорошо знает, кто здесь врет и кто говорит правду. Да будет ему память тем и всем тем, кто погиб за долгие годы конфликта.
Господин президент, вы выступили со страстной речью. И первый вопрос я хочу задать такой. Я даже не знаю, сколько людей ожидали, что вы в этот момент сможете покинуть свою страну и оказаться здесь. Что для вас стало таким важным стимулом приехать сюда? И что вам известно о намерениях Владимира Путина? Может быть, Соединенные Штаты или другие страны чего-то не знают? Сделал он решение вступить в вашу страну? Большое спасибо. Спасибо за этот вопрос. Спасибо за приглашение. Важно, когда обсуждается Украина, то эта информация должна поступать от Украины. Будучи президентом своей страны, я имею свою команду, и важно, чтобы за нашими спинами, над нашими головами ничего за нас не решали. И я сегодня провел важнейшие встречи с лидерами некоторых стран, и эта работа продолжится. Я бы хотел выслушивать вопросы, задавать вопросы и получать ответы, чтобы понять, в какой степени мы способны сопротивляться. Мы не паникуем, мы сильные, мы не будем реагировать ни на какие провокации. У нас даже своя вакцина есть, не такая хорошая, как ковидные вакцины здесь, но ей уже 8 лет, и мы знаем, на что надо реагировать, а на что не надо реагировать. Солдаты погибают, на это надо реагировать, но надо понять, кто убийца, каковы что это за военные группы, и откуда идет огонь, особенно по объектам, окруженным гражданскими лицами. На это надо реагировать и реагировать на эскалации и огонь. Также важно, чтобы у нас было единое понимание с точки зрения фактических данных, и то, что партнеры делятся с нами информацией. Кстати, за это очень благодарны им за сотрудничество разведок. Напряженность наша существует много лет, и поэтому повода для паники я не вижу. Но 150 тысяч военнослужащих на границе – это огромный риск, но еще больший риск, если мы начнем поддаваться на провокацию. С другой стороны, я думаю, что Российская Федерация это тоже люди, это россияне. Они не смогут пойти войной на Украину. И все временно оккупированные территории – это место, где провокации регулярно происходят, и как эта информация провокационно распространяется через средства массовой информации. Мы при этом должны сохранять спокойствие и вести себя по-взрослому. С этой точки зрения Украина взрослее, чем другие вооруженные силы. Эскалация, операции провокационные под прикрытием, подрывы у границы. Мы понимаем эту концепцию операций под прикрытием, но как же их остановить? И как вы оцениваете нынешний уровень провокационных операций? Любая провокация опасна. Как я сказал, наиболее трудный вопрос – это Крым, временно оккупированная территория Донбасса, и все границы, протяженность российской, украинской территории 35 тысяч. И провокации действительно, учитывая эту протяженность и количество войск, огромное. Взрыв одного снаряда может начать ненужное развитие. Партнеры, которые имеют с нами общие границы, имеют общую советскую историю, я думаю, прекрасно понимают этот риск. И Польша, и Балтийские государства, Литва, Эстония, Латвия, Молдова, они прекрасно понимают, чем это может закончиться. Поэтому нам нужно проявлять крайнюю осторожность. Я не могу сказать, что произойдет в следующий момент. В 2015 году, например, было даже больше жертв. И когда иногда говорят, что сейчас самая худшая ситуация, на самом деле она ужасная, она трагическая для нашей страны, для народа. Но и в будущем, наверное, мы убедимся, что это и трагедия для России. Мы имели отличные отношения. Украина, Россия, мы соседи. Как мы будем дальше жить по-соседски? Ну, мы сейчас говорим даже не о соседстве, мы говорим о войне, которая никогда не должна начаться, поэтому риск очень высокий. То, что вчера показывали события на временно оккупированных территориях, минометный огонь, обстрел с обеих сторон, снаряды долетали до Ростова, это российский регион, это прямая провокация, это чистая ложь, не было этих раненых, но это просто граждане настолько доведенные до безумия, что они подрывают сами себя. И с 2014 года такая напряженность, оружие нацелено друг на друга, и нервы не выдерживают. Это такое циничное состояние. Все, что нам нужно, это мир, и я много раз это уже говорил. президенту Российской Федерации, и Ангеле Меркель, и Макрону. В 2019 году мы посылали массу сигналов, делаем это постоянно, обращаемся к разным лидерам, напрямую в Российскую Федерацию, что мы готовы сесть и вести переговоры на любой платформе. Выбирайте, какие еще партнеры вы хотите посадить за стол переговоров. Зачем нас стрелять и предлагать это одновременно? Останавливаете меня, когда я слишком увлекаюсь. А можно задать вам такой вопрос? Вот сегодня, как вы себя чувствуете по сравнению с несколькими днями назад? Вот говорят, это солидарность между США, Украиной, Европой, вы выступаете единым фронтом, и одновременно Соединенные Штаты используют разведданные для того, чтобы точно знать, что делает Путин. Вы говорите, что не надо паниковать, соблюдайте дисциплину. А как вы оцениваете такое агрессивное использование разведданных Соединенными Штатами Америки, чтобы переубедить Путина? Мне трудно судить, как США должны распоряжаться своими разведданными. Я думаю, они это делают профессионально, это их решение. Я благодарен за работу разведорганов, и я доверяю своей разведке. Украинские разведструктуры занимаются мониторингом границы, используют разные источники данных, оценивают, взвешивают риски на основе полученных данных. Мы считаем, мы используем эту информацию. Я неоднократно повторял, что мы не обманываем себя в отношении того, что будет завтра. Может быть, это не правомерное сравнение, но мы же не можем улечься в гробы и ждать наступления завтрашнего дня. Мы не будем наступать нигде, но мы готовы ответить на все. Мы не можем сохранять пассивность. Мы не можем каждый день говорить, да, завтра может быть война. Что будет тогда в этих условиях с нашей экономикой? Да, представьте себе, вам каждый день объявляют, что завтра будет война, что завтра на вас будет наступать. Это значит, падает национальная валюта, люди уезжают из страны, забирают свои капиталы. Как может выжить такая страна? Те, кто хочет нарушить баланс нашей страны, это и делают, потому что кто-то хочет, чтобы Украина была слаба, со слабой армией. А если у страны слабая армия, можно легко вторгнуться. И какая-то будет экономика для наших детей. Поэтому мы так спокойно реагируем, и мы должны оценивать угрозу и думать больше даже о том, что не надо делать в ответ на провокации. Я взвешиваю каждое слово, потому что я должен понимать, что произойдет, когда мои люди услышат мои слова, побегут к банкоматам снимать свои деньги, когда они начнут бояться всего и будет распространяться паника. Идет информационно-пропагандистская борьба, и Украина не сдается, и мы хотим жить. Мы хотим жить, хотим защищать свою страну. Если вы хотите нам помочь, то мы можем привести массу примеров конкретных вещей. Давайте, помогайте нам укреплять армию, давайте нам больше оружия, вкладывайте в нашу экономику, инвестируйте, приглашайте свои компании. Если это страшно, ну хорошо, дайте нам финансирование на выгодных условиях, гранты. Почему? Потому что надо сделать целый список дел и провести кучу реформ. И то есть, когда на твоих границах стоит огромная армия, как можно заниматься реформами? Нет, паника не для нас. Мы хотим жить в сильной стране. Извините, я хотел добавить, одну секунду. Некоторое время тому назад я беседовал с лидером одной ведущей страны, и мы говорили о политике санкций. И у нас разное представление о том, как санкции, когда применять, если в случае российской агрессии. И нам сказали, что у вас несколько дней, после чего начнется война. Я сказал, хорошо, давайте санкции сегодня объявляйте. Они сказали, мне ответили, нет, когда начнется война, тогда будет санкции. Но вы же сказали мне, отвечаю я, что на 100% через несколько дней война начнется. Нам не нужны санкции после того, как нас начнут бомбить. И после того, как нас будут обстреливать, когда границы растворятся, когда будет разрушена наша экономика, и страна оккупирована. Зачем какая польза нам от этих санкций потом? И что можно сделать? Очень много чего можно сделать. Мы можем списком сразу предоставить. Главное, чтобы вы хотели это сделать. То есть вы призываете к тому, чтобы санкции были наложены уже сейчас, чтобы НАТО действовало уже сейчас. Это тонкие вопросы, как мы все понимаем. И вы еще сказали, что вы хотите быть частью НАТО, хотя не ожидаете, что солдаты стран НАТО будут действовать на вашей территории. Вы не хотите, чтобы иностранные армии присутствовали на вашей территории. А на сегодняшний день ваше отношение к членству в НАТО? Отвечаю на первую часть вашего вопроса по санкциям. Вопрос не касается введения санкций сегодня же. Если все в мире понимают, что высокая вероятность войны, эскалации или эскалации завтра. И если Российская Федерация не отводит своих военных, то, мне кажется, логично, если бы они начали отводить свои силы, это понятно, это другое дело. Можно действовать мягче, я говорю о дипломатическом пути, который не предусматривает сразу акций. То есть отводятся войска, нет санкций. Но сегодня даже вопрос публикации списка санкций для России, чтобы она точно знала, что произойдет, какое наказание последует, если она пойдет войной. Даже это не находит понимания. Но давайте я скажу честно. Тогда у меня возникает вопрос, почему, если вы даже не можете сказать открытым текстом, что произойдет с кем в случае начала войны, тогда я сомневаюсь, что они будут введены даже после начала войны. С точки зрения НАТО, конечно, можно долго дебатировать этот вопрос, и мировые лидеры это делают, и мои друзья. У меня появилось много друзей среди международных лидеров, не буду никого называть, чтобы никого не обидеть. Поддержка у нас есть, но Украине нужны гарантии безопасности. Мы люди не зашоренные, мы понимаем все риски, мы понимаем, что нет абсолютного консенсуса среди союзников НАТО. Некоторые говорят, что нам нужно преодолеть большой путь, чтобы дойти до членства в НАТО. Но никто не говорит, сколько времени это надо, чтобы преодолеть эту дистанцию в годах, например. Или или измеряется эта дистанция человеческими жизнями, потерями? Скажите нам, вот этот путь, справедливо ли не давать нам гарантии, пока мы еще находимся на этом пути, хотя дипломатические гарантии? Это же вопрос просто справедливости. Никто же мы же не прижимаем никого к стенке и не говорим, хотим членства в НАТО, но мы хотим иметь такую возможность, и пока она не осуществлена, мы хотим иметь гарантии безопасности.
Минуточку. Наверное, кибератака. Можно мне другую гарнитуру? Видите, Россия вроде как не присутствует, а на самом деле здесь. Не работает что-то у нас. Давайте я тем временем с вами буду говорить, а вы меня поймете. Да я вас с самого начала понимаю. Я хочу сейчас вот что спросить. У США свои разведданные, вы сказали, что у вас свои разведданные. Вот как вы интерпретируете намерения Путина? Кто будет принимать решение о вторжении и состоится ли оно? Я не знаю, чего хочет президент России, поэтому я предложил провести с ним встречу.
Your people are telling me that I have to start in Syria. Huh? Sorry? Your people are telling me that you need to go.
Ваши сотрудники мне говорят, что вам уже надо идти. Вы боялись сюда приехать? Ну нет, почему же я боялся? Здесь меня ждут друзья. Я уверен,
We can. Thank you so much. Україна хоче миру. Європа
Украина очень хочет мира. Европа очень хочет мира. Мы не хотим войны, а Россия утверждает, что она не хочет вмешиваться. Но кто-то врет. Это еще не аксиома, а гипотеза. Я был на линии разделения в Донбассе пару дней тому назад. Это линия, которая разделяет территорию Украины и временно оккупированную территорию. Это линия, которая разделяет мирную территорию и военную территорию. С одной стороны, находятся школы, с другой стороны линии, в эту школу летят снаряды. И причем эти дети идут не в НАТО, они идут в свои классы, кто-то занимается физикой, и дети, которые знают элементарную физику, понимают, что бомбят Украину, и какие-то дети занимаются математикой, и они понимают, что разница между количеством упавших снарядов и количеством нарушений, помянутых в Мюнхенском отчете докладе по безопасности. Когда они видят рядом со своими площадками детскими воронки от снарядов. Такое впечатление, что наш мир забыл о результатах мировой войны, как мы забываем отвечать на вопросы, в чем смысл посылать на смерть тысячи людей, ужасные уроки истории. И этим самым я хочу подчеркнуть, что мы читаем на самом деле одни и те же учебники истории, что мы, как мы дошли до такого момента, что в 20 веке идет война, и люди умирают в Европе, и как и длится это уже дольше, чем Вторая мировая война. Кризис безопасности с окончания Второй мировой войны, который обратился потерей территории, гибелью людей. Страна окружена 150 тысяч солдат танками. Для меня это очевидно. Архитектура безопасности рушится, и какие-то механизмы уже и не работают, появляются новые угрозы, и мы пока не можем эффективно их отражать. То есть это все равно, что принимать сироп вместо вакцины от омикрона. Что мешает? Эгоизм, большое эго, неуемные амбиции, в результате чего некоторые страны совершают преступления, другие становятся безразличными и таким образом соучастниками в преступлении. 15 лет тому назад Российская Федерация сделала заявление здесь и поставила под сомнение основы безопасности. Как отреагировал мир? Достаточно мирно, и затем последовала агрессия против моей страны. ООН заявляет, что мир и безопасность не могут встать на свою собственную защиту. Нарушается устав ООН, происходит аннексия территории одного члена другим членом, отвоевывается Крым, и попираются права людей. Ангела Меркель сказала, кто сможет сложить эти кусочки пазла вместе. Усилиями. Коллективное осуждение не обратилось в коллективные действия, и поэтому возникает угроза большой войны. Что мы можем спасти из этой архитектуры безопасности? Не поздно ли говорить о том, чтобы восстанавливать ее, может быть, создавать новую? Человечество делало это дважды, и каждый раз заплатив высокую цену после каждой мировой войны. Установилась тенденция на курс на новую систему, прежде чем мы потеряем огромное количество людей и обойдемся без третьей войны. В ООН уже говорили, что нет
And there was a strong expectation, we spoke about it a couple of hours ago, that the SWIFT payment system would be on the sanctions list. There was hope that there was unanimity on that, requires unanimity. That wasn't able to happen this time around. Joseph Borrell said it's still on the table for perhaps a third round of sanctions, but it's very disappointing, I think, for many people who felt that this set of sanctions, although they are far-reaching and they're the largest set of sanctions that the EU has ever implemented, they seem to have fallen flat and they seem to have disappointed. We heard commentary from the likes of Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Council, who said the countries that were against you putting SWIFT on the set of sanctions, that they were at disgrace themselves. But G, you're right, SWIFT not on the list, but Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov are.
So a little bit of disappointment there that SWIFT hasn't made the sanctions list. Now, the EU, it's told Ukraine that it's not alone. We've seen, of course, these financial sanctions. But the Ukrainian President Zelensky says more help is needed. So how far do you think Brussels could go? Could SWIFT actually make it onto that sanctions list eventually? And when and why?
Yeah, I mean, unanimity is the problem here because countries, Germany, Italy, Hungary, don't want to have it so far. But Joseph Borrell did hold out hope that eventually he could get on it for the next round. The question is, what does Putin have to do to get a third round of sanctions, to get the SWIFT financial transactions on the list? That's a huge question. We know tonight at the UN Security Council, France is putting forward a resolution condemning Russia for the violence. Obviously, Russia will veto that, but it's hoped that the rest of the General Assembly will vote in favor of condemning Russia because the EU, again, it's not a military organization. It's an organization of 27 member states. The tools that they have is sanctions. And so that's really as far as it can go.
All right, Shona Murray, thank you so much for that update from Brussels. Thank you so much. Now, staying with Brussels, NATO will send more troops to the borders of Eastern Europe. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said following a special leaders summit to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The move comes after Poland called the alliance's forces in the east to be boosted. Together with Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, Poland requested the emergency meeting to discuss Article 4, which covers the security of any parties of the alliance that is threatened. And Stoltenberg says that the alliance has already strengthened its defense.
We are deploying elements of the NATO response force on land, at sea and in the air to further strengthen our posture and to respond quickly to any contingency. The United States, Canada and European allies have deployed thousands of more troops to the eastern part of the alliance. We have over 100 jets at high alert operating in over 30 different locations, and over 120 ships from the high north to the Mediterranean, including 3 strike carrier groups.
Well, for more on that special NATO Leaders Summit, we now go to Brussels and Effie Kutsakosta. Effie, good to see you. So we heard from Jens Stoltenberg. What more can you tell us about what he said and what he says NATO will do?
Yes, exactly. Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, spoke with very strong words today as following the NATO leaders meeting together with Sweden and Finland and the heads of the EU Commission and the EU Council. And what is significant here is that for the first time in NATO's history, they will activate and they will deploy elements of the NATO response force. It's a force with multinational elements, troops and other equipment that it will be deployed for the first time, which means that it's something that Jens Stoltenberg was saying during the press conference, that this is the first time the most severe situation in European security since the Second World War, which is very, very important. Of course, what is also very important to say here is that Jens Stoltenberg said that individual NATO members, NATO countries will continue to offer to give weapons and air defense systems to support Ukraine. Of course, this is the only support that not NATO, but NATO members, individual members, NATO itself cannot do that, of course, but only individual members. And here we have to say that even today we heard the Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium, Sophie Wilmès, when entering the Foreign Affairs Council, she said also that she will look for this kind of opportunity to call this National Security Council in order to find ways to send weapons and equipment to Ukraine itself. But of course, Ukraine, this is the only thing that NATO members and not NATO itself can do for Ukraine. It can do a lot for defending its territory, NATO's territory, as Jens Stoltenberg said, every inch of NATO's territory, in order not only to reassure allies, but also to prevent any spillover.
So NATO defending its own territory, and it continues with that line. Now, we've also heard from the Russian Foreign Ministry, Effie, who have threatened detrimental military and political consequences for both Finland and Sweden if they join NATO. And they were, of course, at that meeting today. So what has been the reaction?
There was no official reaction. They don't want, of course, nobody here wants to really comment officially to any kind of threat for Russia. NATO is always very stable and firm to what it says. It's up to countries to decide their fate and their allies. And they, of course, they are ready to defend any partners, any members of NATO. So all these threats are just threats expected from Putin's side. They've seen how far Russia and Putin's Russia can go with Ukraine. So they are ready to defend and prepare to defend everybody. And of course, they are still open and say that every country, included Ukraine, is ready and free to choose their allies and their own fate. And this, of course, is the same for Finland and Sweden that are neutral for years.
Okay, Afi Kutsakosta, thank you so much for updating us on the latest from NATO and from Brussels. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we will take a short break, but still to come on Euronews, we're heading over to Matthew in the Cube.
Mariam, Russia's state communications watchdog said it is partially restricting Facebook. We'll tell you why after the break.
Welcome back to the programme. Now, Russia has said that it's limiting access to Facebook amid its attack on Ukraine. Let's now head over to Matthew in the Cube for more on this.
Well, Mariam, this was announced by Russia's state communications watchdog. Let me take you straight to the statement. They said they had taken action after the US tech giant had imposed limits on a number of Russian state media channels. Articles, photos, and other pieces of content have been labeled as unreliable. This, of course, comes amid widespread coverage of Russia's attack on Ukraine. But as you can see here, the Russian state authorities said that they had taken this measure to protect Russian media outlets. And from Friday, Facebook would be partially restricted unless those limits on those Russian media channels were lifted. Now, another reason that you should note this comes, of course, amid a growing online movement in Russia. A number of younger citizens, as well as several well-known celebrities, have been sharing this hashtag, which literally translates #NoToWar. Many people expressing their condemnation of President Vladimir Putin and accusing him of warmongering amid this invasion of Ukraine. Other people on Facebook in Russia have been changing their avatars to either the Ukrainian flag or other symbols and graphics to show their support for Ukraine's freedom. Now, it's not the first time that Facebook or indeed any other social media channels have been limited in Russia. But Mariam, the timing, of course, this time is particularly significant. It's not exactly clear how much this restriction will affect Facebook in Russia. But once again, you see the Moscow and the Kremlin trying to control the narrative amid fighting on the ground in Ukraine and an online propaganda war as well.
Thank you for that update. Thank you so much. Now, the EU has agreed to, of course, put President Vladimir Putin and his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on a sanctions list. It's the second package the bloc has announced following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But Brussels is facing criticism for not going far enough, and Italy is one member being singled out. Well, for more, let's now go over to Rome and speak to Georgia Orlandi. So, Georgia, we've got this latest sanctions package from the EU, but that SWIFT payment system, it's not included. Now, we do know, of course, that Italy was reported to have been one of the countries blocking it. Why has it been doing that?
Hi, Marianne. Well, yes, early reports suggested that Italy would be among those countries that would actually block those sanctions. But we just heard from Italy's Foreign Secretary Luigi Di Maio not that long ago. He said that Italy will be fully aligned with the rest of the EU, so won't block those sanctions. And this has now become official as Italy's government's main press office just confirmed that. Perhaps those early reports stem from the fact that, as we know, half of Italy's gas supply is supplied by Moscow. So if Moscow is going to cut that off, clearly there will be dire consequences both for Italy and Russia. We've seen what has happened in the past few weeks. Fears over a possible conflict already sent energy prices skyrocketing. We've seen markets being on the edge for weeks, with experts warning that an invasion or even sanctions could push
but basically.
So it would seem that the fighting now is very, very close to the center of Kiev.
It looks like that. I mean, from the pictures I'm getting, but basically what I see, I've just got a message from my mom. Finally, I couldn't reach her.
She is in Kiev itself.
Yeah,
she's been taking.
And luckily she was not in our building, which is bombed at night. Because she was
literally the building that we've been talking about that has been destroyed by what happened.
Yes, you know, when we agreed yesterday about coming to a studio in the morning, I could not imagine that actually at 3 a.m. London time, I would find out that actually my home is bombed. And yeah, and those pictures, that footage that everybody saw, it's literally my home, and people were evacuated into the school where I was studying. And well, yes, but thanks God, my family